had enough of this. You know. I hope it will last. I don't want to see any of my friends getting killed. Or something. I hope the politicians will sit down and talk. Because that's the only way out.
October 20th, 1994. Southwestern Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Bosnian War had already torn the region apart for over 2 years. What began as a conflict between Bosnian Serbs and non-Serbs had evolved into a three-sided nightmare. By late 1994, the army of Republika Srpska controlled roughly 70% of Bosnia and Herzegovina. That proportion hadn't changed significantly in 2 years. But on this morning, something was about to change. The army of the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina was launching Operation Autumn '94, a calculated push into Serb-held territory. The primary target was Donji Vakuf, 20 kilometers northwest, but there was a secondary objective, a town called Kupres. The town sat on a strategic plateau commanding the northern approaches to Croatian-held territory and the vital Split-Livno, Kupres-Bugojno road. Before the war, it had been home to a significant Croat community. In April 1992, the army of Republika Srpska took it. Now, two former enemies were about to fight side by side to take it back. To understand how this moment came to be, you have to go back 3 years. In 1991, as Yugoslavia disintegrated, Croatia declared independence. The predominantly Serb-populated areas of the Dalmatian hinterland around Knin, parts of Lika, Kordun, and Banovina revolted. These areas formed the Republic of Serbian Krajina and declared their intention to politically integrate with Serbia. The Croatian government viewed it as a rebellion. By March 1991, the conflict escalated into the Croatian War of Independence. As the Yugoslav People's Army increasingly supported the Krajina Serbs and Croatian police couldn't cope, the Croatian National Guard was formed in May. By November, it was renamed the Croatian Army. The United Nations arms embargo in September hampered its development. The final months of 1991 saw the fiercest fighting, the Battle of the Barracks, the Siege of Dubrovnik, the Battle of Vukovar. By early 1993, a campaign of ethnic cleansing had expelled most non-Serbs from Serb-held territories. In UN-protected Sector South, fewer than 400 ethnic Croats remained. In Sector North, between 1,500 and 2,000. In January 1992, the Sarajevo Agreement paused the fighting in Croatia. United Nations Protection Force was deployed, but the Yugoslav People's Army retreated into Bosnia and Herzegovina, where a new conflict was brewing. On January 9, 1992, Bosnian Serbs declared the Serbian Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina. On March 1st, ahead of the independence referendum, Bosnian Serbs set up barricades in Sarajevo and elsewhere. The next day, the first fatalities were recorded in Sarajevo and Doboj. In the final days of March, the Bosnian Serb army began artillery attacks on Bosanski Brod. The Croatian Army's 108th Brigade crossed the border in response. On April 4th, Serb artillery began shelling Sarajevo. By the end of 1992, what had started as Bosnian Serbs against non-Serbs evolved into a three-sided conflict. The Croat-Bosniak War erupted within the larger war. Then came the Washington Agreement. In March 1994, following a new military strategy endorsed by President Bill Clinton, the United States brokered a deal between Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. The agreement ended the Croat-Bosniak War and created the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. On paper, it united the army of the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Croatian Defense Council against their common enemy, the army of Republika Srpska. But cooperation on paper doesn't mean cooperation in practice. The Bosnian army adopted an attrition warfare strategy. They had numerical superiority now. The army of Republika Srpska was suffering from manpower shortages. The strategy called for limited advances without heavy weapons or transport, neither of which the Bosnian army had in sufficient quantities. From March to November 1994, the Bosnian army conducted a series of attacks with relatively limited objectives. They hit the army of Republika Srpska at Vlašić Mountain, at the Stolice Peak of Majavica Mountain, at Donji Vakuf, in the area between Tišanj and Teslić, near Brčko, at Kledunj, around Sarajevo, on the Bjelašnica and Treskovica Mountains, at Gračanica, Variš, Konjic, and Doboj. Together with the Croatian Defense Council, they attacked near Nevesinje in September through November. Most of these offensives made little or no gains. At the same time, Army of Republika Srpska attacks north of Sarajevo were successfully repulsed. The Bosnian Army General Staff hoped the Serb forces couldn't muster sufficient reserves to hold off the simultaneous attacks scattered across multiple fronts. Little territory changed hands by the end of October, but the army of Republika Srpska's shortage of troops worsened, and that's when attention turned to Kupres. For the Bosnian army, Kupres was a secondary objective in a larger operation. Alegić responded by making a public call to the HVO to join the offensive against the army of Republika Srpska in Kupres. The same day, November 1st, the army of Republika Srpska fired two 9K-52 Luna M missiles at Bugojno. On November 2nd, the HVO captured Gornji Malovan and Relic. Serb civilians began evacuating from Kupres. The writing was on the wall. That afternoon, Alegić visited the HVO Tomislavgrad Corps headquarters to discuss coordination. But when he arrived, he refused to proceed with the meeting. He said the officers present weren't senior enough to make decisions. He proposed a new meeting at 11 p.m. that night at the Bosnian Army 317th Brigade headquarters in Gornji Vakuf. Major General Tihomir Blaškić, chief of the HVO General Staff, sent a written apology claiming HVO officers had to be elsewhere at the time. The meeting happened as Alegić proposed. It lasted until 3 a.m. on November 3rd. Alegić and Colonel Josip Černi, commander of the HVO Tomislavgrad Corps, hammered out an agreement. The Bosnian army would withdraw some troops on the right flank of the HVO advance. This would allow the HVO to strike Kupres from that direction. Beyond the town, they would coordinate their movements. There was no joint command structure. The two forces would remain separate. But there was cooperation. For the first time since the Washington Agreement was signed, the army of the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Croatian Defense Council were actually working together. By 11 a.m. on November 3rd, the Bosnian army pullback was complete. While some units withdrew to make room for the Croatian advance, the right flank of the Bosnian force didn't stop moving. They pressed forward to capture the Kupreška Vrata Pass, 3 kilometers from Kupres. The pass secured, the path was clear. Shortly after noon, Bosnian Croat Special Police and the 61st Guards Airborne Battalion Ludvig Pavlović entered Kupres. The town was largely abandoned. Most Serb civilians had already evacuated. Army of Republika Srpska forces had pulled back, unable to hold without reserves. By 1:30 p.m., the HVO had completed capture of the town. The Croatian Defense Council didn't stop at the town limits. They continued advancing, seizing nearly the entire Kupres plateau. The 1st, 79th, and 81st Home Guards regiments moved in to hold defensive positions across the plateau. The army of Republika Srpska had no reserves in place to mount a meaningful counterattack. The battle was over. The Bosnian army significantly shortened its positions held opposite the army of Republika Srpska and captured 130 square kilometers of territory. 41 soldiers were killed in action. 162 were wounded. The HVO captured nearly 400 square kilometers around Kupres. By November 3rd, 4 HVO troops had been killed and 15 wounded. The next day, in an army of Republika Srpska counterattack near Zlosela at 11 a.m., 3 more HVO soldiers died and 5 were wounded. The Battle of Kupres was the first concrete result of the Washington Agreement, the first coordinated military operation between the Army of the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Croatian Defense Council since the agreement was signed 7 months earlier. Following the victory, morale of both forces soared. But the advantages went beyond morale. The recapture of initiative from the army of Republika Srpska was critical. For the first time in months, Serb forces were reacting rather than dictating the pace of operations. Full control of the split Livno-Kupres-Bogojno road meant dramatically improved logistics for both the Bosnian army and the Croatian Defense Council in the area. It meant greater volume of transport for arms and ammunition. And in November 1994, the United States unilaterally ended the arms embargo against Bosnia and Herzegovina. The move allowed the Croatian army to supply itself as arms shipments flowed through Croatia into Bosnia. The road through Kupres became a critical artery, but the most significant impact of the Battle of Kupres wouldn't be felt immediately. The territorial gains secured the right flank of the Livanjsko field. Later that month, Operation Winter 94 was launched by the Croatian Army and the Croatian Defense Council northwest of Livno. The objective was to draw off a part of the force besieging Bihać and prevent its capture by the army of Republika Srpska. Without the gains made at Kupres, Operation Winter 94 would have been exposed to attack from the south. The battle had created the conditions for the next offensive. Kupres was not the largest battle of the Bosnian War. Casualty figures were modest compared to other engagements. The territory gained, while significant, was measured in hundreds of square kilometers, not thousands, but it marked a turning point. The primary goal was Donji Vakuf to the northwest. Kupres was meant to threaten the army of Republika Srpska's supply route, weakening their defense around Donji Vakuf. For the Croatian Defense Council, Kupres was personal. They wanted to reverse the April 1992 loss. The town had been home to a significant Croat community before the war, and they wanted control of the Tomislavgrad-Bugojno-Šipovo road. It's unclear exactly how the two forces coordinated before the offensive. Most likely their commands agreed on a simultaneous attack without revealing actual battle plans to each other. The Croatian Defense Council's operation, codenamed Operation Sinkar, was planned jointly by the HVO and the Croatian army. Although Croatia would later deny that its army participated in the battle, evidence suggests otherwise. The Zrinski battalion of the 1st Croatian Guards Brigade would be specifically identified in Bosnian Croat reports as taking part in the operation. At 2 a.m. on October 20th, the Bosnian Army's 7th Corps launched its secondary axis toward Kupres. 3,130 soldiers pushed forward along a 14-kilometer front southwest of Bugojno. The 370th Mountain Infantry Brigade took the right flank. The 307th Mountain Infantry Brigade held the left. Hours earlier, the primary force of 5,600 troops had moved against Donji Vakuf, facing an estimated 4,800 army of Republika Srpska soldiers. By the end of that first day, the primary offensive had stalled. Kupres became the main objective. The army of Republika Srpska held the town and surrounding plateau with approximately 2,700 troops from the 7th Motorized Infantry Brigade of the 2nd Krajina Corps, commanded by Colonel Radivoje Tomanic. They had corps-level artillery support, they had armor, but they were stretched thin across multiple fronts, and reserves were non-existent. The Bosnian army brought in reinforcements. The 317th Mountain Infantry Brigade joined the push, making initial advances toward the town. Then elements of the 305th Mountain Brigade arrived. The force grew, pressing forward ridge by ridge through difficult mountain terrain, slowly closing in on Kupres. It was slow, grinding work, one mountain ridge to the next. By October 23rd, they were close enough to hit Kupres with heavy mortar fire. On October 25th, Brigadier General Mehmet Aligic, commander of the Bosnian Army's 7th Corps, requested a meeting with Croatian Defense Council representatives to coordinate further advances. The HVO postponed the meeting until after October 28th. Their Tomislavgrad Corps was getting a new commanding officer. The fighting continued. The 37th Light Infantry Brigade joined the Bosnian push on October 27th. Elements of the 27th Mountain Infantry Brigade followed, a battalion from the 7th Conscripted Mountain Infantry Brigade. By October 28th, a Guards Brigade attached to the Bosnian Army General Staff entered the battle. The force attacking Kupres had swelled to over 8,000 troops. Meanwhile, the Croatian Defense Council had been watching. Since the start of the Bosnian offensive, the HVO had been assembling 3 of its 4 Guards Brigades under General Ante Rosso, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Guards Brigades, the 60th Guards Airborne Battalion Ludvig Pavlovich, Bosnian Croat Special Police, and elements of the Croatian Army, though Croatia officially denied their presence. On October 29th, the Ministry of Defense of the Croatian Republic of Herceg Bosnia and the HVO General Staff met and authorized Operation Sinkar. The decision was motivated by 2 factors. First, the desire to consolidate territory controlled by the HVO around Kupres. Second, the strategic importance of the Kupres Plateau itself, which commanded the northern approaches to the HVO-held Livensko field. The objective was simple: capture Kupres. The operation was scheduled for October 31st at 4:30 a.m. Then it was pushed back 24 hours. The HVO needed more time to prepare. Reconnaissance teams arrived late. The offensive was delayed again, now set for 8 a.m. on November 1st, 1994. At the designated hour, the HVO advanced north along 2 main axes. The western axis moved from Shueka along the main road toward Kupres. The eastern axis pushed from Ravno toward Relic. On the first day, the western axis captured the village of Donji Malovan. And then something unexpected happened. Just as the HVO began moving north, the Bosnian army stopped advancing westward. Various explanations were offered: fog, rain, equipment wear, fatigue, the need to secure territorial gains already made, but the real reason came in a phone call. That same day, Alija Izetbegovic, president of Bosnia and Herzegovina, called Brigadier General Mehmet Aligic. The message was direct: cooperate with the HVO, avoid any conflicts. For the first time since the Washington Agreement, 2 former enemies had fought together. The coordination was imperfect. Communication was difficult. The command structure remained separate. Trust was still being built, one meeting at a time. But the battle proved something that diplomats in Washington had only been able to write on paper. The alliance could work, and in the months that followed, it would. The cooperation forged in the October mud and November cold around Kupres would set the stage for the coordinated offensives of 1995 that would ultimately reshape the map of Bosnia and Herzegovina and bring the war toward its conclusion.